If no one's going to do it for you, you have to be the one to do it for yourself.
People are still feeling taboo about rates and money.
The average going rate is about a day. I'll wrap on a project and then I got to hop on a flight to go to another one the next day. It's literally my favorite thing in the world.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the MIDCONVO podcast. We have an amazing guest today, but we have a slight difference in the normal routine. Paul, our co-host, is actually not here today. And that's because I'm actually on this trip right now with MusicBed. There's a bunch of creators here, and we're sitting down with Carlo. And he's Carlo Stigliano?
That's how you pronounce it. Yeah.
Oh, sweet.
Stigliano.
Is it Giancarlo Stigliano?
Giancarlo Stigliano.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go.
If you want to be legit, Stigliano.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to stick with Carlo, so I don't mess that up. But we have Carlo here with us today. He is a DP based in Jersey, and he's just super talented, super good guy. A lot of experience on set, does YouTube, a lot of things we can kind of learn from him, and I'm excited to have this conversation. I'm sad Paul's not here, so Paul, when you're listening to this, we miss you, my guy.
I miss you, Paul.
Let's roll the intro music and get this started. Just to give a little context, you are a DP, as I just said in the intro. Can you tell me, like, in what industry are you kind of doing the DP work?
Right. So primarily most of the work that I'm doing is in the commercial space, which means that I'm doing stuff for brands, bigger companies, TV spots. I'm doing social ads. And typically those projects range anywhere from like 1 day to 4 or 5 days. So usually pretty short term in that regard. But they have some decent budget, they're creative, and you're usually just surrounded by some great people.
Mm-hmm. So on this trip, I said in the intro too, we're on this trip with MusicBed. There's a few people here. How important do you think network has been in the success that you've had in your career? Because you have a lot of experience with being on set, and also just in general, like you've just been on some really cool projects. How important is network?
It's definitely what has gotten me, I guess, to where I am so far. I think a story that I can kind of tell to relate to that would be prior to moving to the Philadelphia area and kind of where I am now, I lived about an hour and a half away. And at this point, I think it was like three and a half years ago, something like that. I was living at home with my mom still. And at this point, I was interning for Danny. And I was starting to grow as a DP and find myself, essentially. Mm-hmm. But I knew I needed to move out and find a place to live. So I was looking in the Philly area. And prior to moving out, I think I spent about 2 or 3 months consistently driving back and forth to Philly, to home, about an hour, hour and a half, just to have a coffee meeting with a producer, just to have a chat with a director, production companies. And I did this for like 2 months. And the reason for that was because when I knew I was going to move into that new place, I wanted to have those relationships already built and established. So when I got there, I wasn't starting from zero. So that's just kind of like a little story of how I think of networking and relationships. Is just, it's essential. It's crucial, especially as a freelancer.
Yeah. To give a little context, you mentioned Danny, you interned for Danny.
Right.
How do you pronounce his last name? Danny
Gevirtz.
Yeah.
You want to hear a funny story, actually?
Yeah, go for it.
The first private screening in Philly, they messed up his name on the, I forget what you call it, but it was like Gevirtz. I think they messed it up like 3 times.
Imagine having like your first premiere for your movie. That's like your first. It's like your debut. They literally get your last name wrong
3 times. Sorry, that was just funny.
Yeah. For those listening who don't know who Danny is, he's also a really talented filmmaker, director. He does YouTube as well, and he just recently, you guys worked on a narrative short film recently?
Feature film.
That's right. It's a little out of my world, but it looked amazing. You guys had huge turnouts at these events.
Yeah, I think they sold out every one of them.
And you DP'd the entire thing?
I DP'd about 85% or so of it.
Yeah, super talented crew that you guys had with you. Mm-hmm. And I want to go back a little bit to the interning portion.
Okay.
I feel like a lot of people view, like, if you become an intern, they kind of view that as like a low position sometimes. right? Or they're like, oh, but if I want to pick up a camera and start making money, they want to come out the gate making a lot of money doing it, right? Because they hear all their friends that are making a ton of money. Was that something that you just knew, like you wanted to put the reps in, or how did you get into the headspace of, you know what, like these 2 months are the time for me to really put my head down, make good connections, put my ego aside, be a humble guy? Because like, I mean, you're freaking talented, dude. Like your eye for composition, your eye for just everything filmmaking is so good, but you still were humble enough to put that aside and just do the things you need to do to at least get your foot in through the door.
Right.
Was that something that you actively were being aware of, or just comes natural to you?
I think it comes to just being never stop being a student, that mentality. And at the point where I was working with Danny in the beginning, it was kind of like a pivotal place for me where I had a production company and I was doing smaller business work like pizzeria stuff, barbershops, that type of small business shooting. But I felt like I was missing something that wasn't fulfilling to me.
Okay.
And at this point, I didn't really know much about the actual traditional filmmaking space. I didn't know the different positions on set. I didn't know what a DP was. I didn't know a production designer. I didn't know anything. And I was just
crazy.
I was just shooting. I had a camera. I enjoyed it. I was just shooting video. And I think I came across one of his videos about being a DP, and I was like, that description of what that title is and what that crew member is exactly what I was looking for. And it just, by happenstance, I got to work with him and shadow him for a little over a year. But I knew that every time I step on set with him or just do behind the scenes of his YouTube, it was an amazing opportunity to just learn from someone who is truly at like the top of their game.
Yeah.
At least I thought he was on the top of his game back then, and where he is now, he's just like elevated tremendously. Yeah. But
this stuff's awesome.
I was just super grateful for that opportunity, and I took everything that he did, said. I just watched, learned, and just took everything.
I think that's important to hit on what you just shared, because we were talking off the mic a couple days ago, I think, and it's one of those situations where a lot of creatives who, have a camera, they're making money with, helping their local businesses, doing some social content or whatever, right? Like videographer, I guess you call it title. Yeah. And honestly, I'm not huge on titles. Like I don't really, think a videographer's bad or filmmaker's bad or whatever, but I think no one really talks about the jump from becoming that like one-man band to being able to be a DP on set with a production crew of like 20 people. Like that leap right there is so blurry, and it's like such a big gap that no one really talks about. It's like one day you're a YouTuber or like a little videographer with a Ronin and a Sony, and then the next day you're freaking shooting on Alexa with cinema glass and stuff, and they're like, I just wanted to become a DP, so I'm
happened.
Here. Yeah, which is obviously, we know that's not the case. Right. And so it's actually really fascinating, even just to me personally, to shed some light on that process. And sounds like for you, your path was finding that person who really knows their stuff, super nice guy, able to he became your mentor. Right. And you just learned all the things, and even small things like terminology. Yeah. I remember for me too, really like terms that I would never understand unless you went to film school or you've been on set with people who say those things. I remember the very first time I was on like a set, I was like a PA, and they were saying all these terms, and I was thinking to myself, not trying to like act like I don't know what I'm doing, but literally I was so confused. When I first heard stinger, I was like, what are they talking about? Like crossing? Why do you say crossing when you're going in front of the camera?
The craziest one is C47. Do you know what C47?
No.
A clothespin.
A clothespin?
Yeah.
And they call it C47. Why can't we just call it a clothespin?
I don't know.
That's the most filmmaking thing I've ever heard. Right, yeah. Let's just create these hard words. So.
Exactly.
Hey, does this make the barrier to entry just harder? Let's just make all these words.
Yeah, but you get it after a while.
No, you
start to pick it up.
I mean, it's just like any industry, right? There's some terms that like it's how it is in business too, right? Like they have a bunch of acronyms that if you know it, and if you don't, you just don't.
Exactly.
Cool. Let's pivot. I want to switch gears a little bit. So you are also on YouTube, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey on that front? Because you are very much so in the professional space doing client work that is, high end, but you're also, have a YouTube channel, you're creating breakdowns, you're doing really cool stuff on the YouTube side of things. Is that like, do you find a little bit of a common ground between the two, or is like two totally opposite sides of your brain when it comes to?
It's totally opposite. It is the most polar opposite thing. But yeah, I think the reason I continue to do YouTube is I found so much joy in seeing the response people have given me from certain like specific videos that I've made. And a lot of those specific ones have to do with like mental health stuff, have to do with anxiety as a freelancer, dealing with certain things that necessarily aren't talked about often, less technical, less camera related, less lighting related, but more about the practicality and the life of a freelancer. And as I talk about those things and share my experiences, seeing the response people get, and I guess seeing how relatable it is, because for me, I do those videos as a form of therapy for me, because I deal with a lot of this stuff. So talking it out to a camera is just me getting it out. It's therapy. But then when I release it to the world and I see the response that people are also feeling this way, it helps me feel like I'm not alone, and it also helps them feel like they're not alone too. So yeah, that's part of the reason I continue to do it, is just because the response that people have given me, but it's a totally different muscle in my brain, because it's just me in my living room with my dog, and then I'm over there working with a bunch of different people and balancing a bunch of different things, but I enjoy them almost equally.
I think it's cool because you view YouTube as an outlet,
right?
And I think that as long as that sticks around, you'll always be doing YouTube. I think the moment something becomes like a burden or like a job, that's when it gets a little bit tough. I'm sure anyone who does YouTube I try to make it consistently, post videos, but the moment I start getting in my own head, like, oh, I post weekly, I gotta post consistently. Like when I start to get into that headspace, it's very hard for me to show up my authentic self. Right.
I feel the exact same way. Yeah, I struggle with wanting to post every Monday. Be there when you guys wake up on Monday at 8 o'clock in the morning, my face pops up. But I find that when I force myself to do that, the quality starts dipping.
But that's just kind of what we've always known about the YouTube space. It's like weekly uploads, like really catchy clickbaity thumbnails, like all these things. But there's something kind of beautiful about just doing your own thing without trying to conform to some sort of guideline. So that's really awesome that you're doing both. You're a DP, you're also doing YouTube. One thing that I've noticed fun fact about Carlo on this trip we're on, this man is disciplined. Like when he says he's gonna wake up at 6 a.m, he is up at 6 a.m.
Right.
Even if we have a late night, like we went to bed late last night and he's still like clockwork. He woke up, he was ready for this podcast. And one thing that I think is kind of fascinating with freelancers in particular is the correlation between discipline and work ethic, and then the success, like how important that is. So in your life, have you always had this structure? And if you have, what are some tips you have for some freelancers who may be feeling like they just can't quite get that momentum just in their overall well-being, like mental state? They don't have that work ethic. They don't have that urge, because I know it, but like when you have that clear head and you have that motivation and that discipline, it just kind of trickles into all other aspects of your life.
Yeah, discipline is one of the biggest things. It's one of the most important aspects of who I am in my life. I think I grew up in a household that required high discipline and structure, and I think that's helped me as I've gotten older. But for those that feel that they might lack discipline or motivation to do something, I think it's a matter of truly finding their passion in something and potentially not forcing something that they think might be for them or they want it to be for them, but they truly don't feel motivated to do it. If you don't feel the passion truly within you about what you're doing, it's going to be really hard for you to stay motivated about it. You have to be truly passionate about it to get up and be like, I'm waking up today and I'm grateful that I'm doing what I'm doing. Not I have to wake up today and I don't want to do this today, or I have to do this today. You should be excited about waking up. Listen, going to sleep is one of my favorite parts of the day, but also waking up, I feel energized about what I have to do that day. But a practical way of staying organized, motivated, and disciplined for me is being religious with my Google Calendar. I am so organized on my calendar. I have everything color coded.
Yeah.
So like a little tidbit on my schedule.
Yes, go into it. I want to hear.
So this is for when I'm not on set. When I'm on set, it changes drastically because, I'm on set for 10, 12 hours. But if I'm working from home, I usually get up at around 5 o'clock, and between 5 and 9 is a specific block on my calendar that is dedicated to me and like me and maybe my fiance, but she goes to work. But that's my time. So I wake up, I go to the gym, come back, I eat a little bit, I shower, and then by that time it's about 8 o'clock. 8 to 9 is when I usually read, I write, and do some other personal things. Sometimes I meditate. And I know that might sound like woo-woo to a lot of people, but like having this structure. But for me, it's helped having this like consistent couple hours in the morning for me. And then the rest of the day, I plan the night before. So if I know that I'm not going to be on set that next day, but I have a YouTube video or I have a podcast or I have meetings, it's all scheduled in my calendar the night before. So I know what my day looks like and I know how to prepare myself for that day.
Dang, you are locked in.
I have to be.
Yeah.
The way that I look at it is no one's going to provide a schedule for you. You work a 9-to-5 job, they're going to provide a schedule for you. So if no one's going to do it for you, you have to be the one to do it for yourself. I treat my life like a 9-to-5. I start my day at 9, and then I usually end at 5, 6 o'clock. And at that time, I'm usually done with my work, and I spend the time with my fiance. I cook dinner, I relax, and I do it again for the next day.
Yeah.
For me, it reduces the possibility of burnout and still being present with her and my friends and other people.
This man's got to figure it out.
I definitely don't have it figured out, but it's a work in progress that is working for me at this moment.
I love that. I can relate to a lot of parts of it because I've gone through a lot of different parts of my own self-discipline, and I've definitely realized that morning block for me too, absolutely crucial.
Right.
Like that 5 to 9 is crucial for me too. I actually like to start my work in that time period. I hit the gym too first, and then my work probably starts around like 7-ish to 9. I like that 2 to 3 hour block where, people aren't in the office yet at like other jobs. So my email's not blowing up. People aren't texting. The moment it hits like 9 to 1-ish, right. I mean, dude, emails come up, and I have this bad habit where if I have my email open once, and then, some of the people like are responding quick, and I'm like, I feel pressured to respond again. Yeah. I'm like, then I get in this bad rabbit hole of just responding to emails.
Emails are almost like text message at this point.
No,
normally they're supposed to be like, I'll respond in like 5 hours.
There's just so many distractions. Like you got emails, you got DMs, you got people threading now, and you got people posting stories, tagging you. You're like, oh, I got to share this. Right. It's like all over the place. But it's really cool that you have your Google Calendar that you use. And you're so right. I mean,
color coded, everything.
It's you do as a freelancer, if you run your own business, and even if you're not a freelancer, you work at a company, like you need a schedule, because if you just kind of leave the day up to how you're feeling, you're never really, there's going to be so many days where you're just off and you don't get done what you need to get done.
And everything's in time blocks. And I think that's important, is when you have a task that you want to get accomplished, don't just write in your calendar, like, create a YouTube video. Put the time frame in, like, I'm going to create a YouTube video about this topic from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. today. Like, that is your window to do it, because for me, it forces me to get it done in that time frame. So that's really important as well. Staying on schedule.
But do you actually, for your Google Calendar, I guess I'm personally interested in this question, but do you time block your work blocks as well? Like, you have like your things you got to get done, but do you actually put...
I put everything in.
Like, gym, you put like meditation, 30 minutes, you put work hours, and then you like the colors taking up that block.
So every day on my calendar has a consistent morning block.
Oh, you already had it, so it's
I already
like
have
automatic.
it preset the morning. So wake up at that time all the way up until 9 a.m. That part of my day, the me time, is in every day automatically. Anything after that is a variable that changes per day.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So that 5 to 9
is always
there. Like, it's a preset. So that's like every day it's the same. So then obviously if something comes up, like a flight or something, then you swap it
changes.
out and whatnot.
So when I'm on set, when I'm flying or traveling, or I got some occasion that I have to do, I'm not religious about, like, if I don't do it at this point, at this location, this whatever, I fail for the day. Like, I'm okay with changing things and altering things and not being like perfect in that sense, which I think is also important.
Yeah, you don't want to be like so rigid to the point where you miss out on experiences and whatnot in life. No, that's really cool. Okay, so going into a little bit about where you're headed then. So I feel like you're very disciplined. You have been freelance. You kind of have been on set. You've kind of tried all the things. How do you find your North Star? Like, how do you figure out each month, each 6 months, each next year, like where you're headed? I mean, I guess it's kind of a loaded question. Like, everyone's kind of work in progress figuring it out. But I do think there is also something amongst people who are crushing it, who have this kind of general North Star. Like, from the outside looking in, it always seems like they got to figure it out, which we know is not true. Like, everyone always is, has things they're dealing with. But for you, when I look at your stuff from the outside looking, it's like, oh man, Carlo's got to figure it out. Like, he's really figured out this DP thing. He's making YouTube videos. He's already like DP'd for a feature film. Like, he's really got to figure it out. But here on the mic, in these kind of opportunities, I'd love to hear from you. Like, okay, can you shed some light on that aspect? Like, do you also feel that way, or are you constantly refining of where you're headed? And if so, how do you figure out that portion where you're headed and making sure you stay on track, aside from this day-to-day disciplinary tasks?
I'm always figuring it out, and I am the same way. I'll look at people and be like, oh, they got it figured out. They got that big commercial, they got that big job, and I sit there and I'm like, and I forget that 2 days prior I was on a big commercial.
Yeah.
So it's a weird cycle, but definitely don't have it figured out. But in terms of how I try to figure out my month, my 3 months, 6 months, where I want to go in the future, I think it's just about, honestly, I don't want to say like taking it day by day, but like sometimes when I look too far in the future, I get a little like paralyzed in thought about what I need to do, what I got to do. Like, I find that just being like what I have to do this day, what I have to do this week, whatever, because when I'm working on commercials or I'm booked for things, I'm usually in prep for like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks prior to shooting. So I'm having a lot of meetings, and that's where a lot of my energy goes into. So I usually try to stay focused on the things that I'm working on at this moment, and hopefully what I'm working on at this moment will start propelling me to that next place. But I think it's also about recognizing the right projects to take at a certain point, and it's being fortunate to kind of say no to certain projects. And I know that in the beginning, you rarely say no to a project ever. You want the project, you want the money, you want to shoot, you want to do everything. But at a certain point, when you start curating your look, your style, your taste, you have to say no to certain things that don't align with it. Even though the money might be great, or you just want to shoot something, it might not be the best place for your time in that moment. And with some other things that I have going on besides DPing, like YouTube, podcast, spending time with my fiance and family is also grown in importance to me. Like, in the beginning, I was work ethic, just work, nonstop. But now I feel as though I'm in a place where I want to raise the level of importance of spending time with her, my family, my friends, enjoying life a little bit.
That's good.
I think
Finding that balance for you.
Yeah, it's just finding the balance really for me, and trying to stay as present as I can.
Like what you said about focusing on the day-to-day, not getting too caught up in where you're headed, because it can lead to a little bit of like paralyzing if like you're just so caught up in the future, you kind of forget to live in the present.
And you also just forget like what you just did sometimes. Like, that's what I said it before, but I forget that I just did an amazing project. But you're always looking at what is the next thing I have to do? What is the next thing I have to do? But you sometimes forget to reflect on the amazing thing that you just spent 3 weeks working on. And that to me helps me stay grounded. And a bit more focused on like my current life. Is just like, I did this awesome thing. Let me just be grateful that I just did that, because I spent so much time on it.
Everyone who listens to this podcast is very interested, I think, in the overall creative industry. But one thing we like to do on this podcast is kind of get into the weeds about some of the business aspects. Yeah. I think I've always thought there was a bit of a gray area when it came to like day rates and whatnot with like DPs. Like I've heard some DPs make like 10 grand a day. I've heard DPs that make $1,000 a day. Right. Can you shed some light on the processes that you've kind of gone through, like whatever you feel comfortable sharing with the business side, like going from freelancer to being on set and then going into the day rate, kind of format, what that looks like? And I think people, obviously it's a lot more, for me, I'm speaking personally, it's a lot easier to be present in the moment when I'm not financially strapped. Like when I was financially strapped, I'm like, I take everything, which then in turn leads to you being like work. And then intrusive thoughts like Rihanna's song just came work.
She just started singing in your head.
Oh yeah, anyway. So this is the business aspect of it.
The day rate thing is interesting because it varies tremendously on your skill, your experience, the type of project, and the location that you're shooting. For a DP that's at like a moderate to, professional level that's doing great projects, the average going rate is about $1,500 a day.
And that's for like a full day.
And that's for 10 hours usually. Yeah. And most of the time DPs rarely will get overtime because they're getting paid more than most of the other crew, obviously. Yeah. But we also have the opportunity to charge for pre-production,
like
prep, scouts, things like that. And a lot of DPs don't realize that.
Yeah.
And it's something I had to learn, because you're on prep for 2 weeks on a commercial and you have 5 Zoom meetings, emails, you're doing scouts, you're doing all these things that are taking your time, but they're not charging for it. You're not charging for it. So something that I've learned is that if you're going to require a lot of my time in pre-production, I would like to get paid for it. Even though some productions, they don't have the money to pay for it, I will still do the pre-pro because I want it to be the best project possible. But it's a conversation that I always have though, is how can I get paid for pre-production, scouts, if I go on scouts, and then the production. And I'm never trying to look to obviously drain the production's funds for me specifically. I just want to make sure that, I'm being compensated for the amount of time, effort, and work that I'm putting in to make this production as efficient and as good as possible. But yeah, the day rates, I've seen anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000 a day, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a day. And
that's wild.
That doesn't include
camera
equipment.
Camera kit.
Yeah, exactly. Which is another business.
And some DPs have their own gear, and then you're renting out the gear to the production that you own. And so you could easily, if you're really, really good and you've been doing it for a long time, I'm sure you could be making like, 10 to 15 grand a day.
It's definitely, it could be up there for sure.
Yeah.
Especially if you're working on a huge commercial that's like 4 days long. You can work 4 days that month and you're good.
You're not even editing.
Yeah, you're not.
That's the part that's the kicker, bro. That's crazy,
job, dude. I love that.
That you crush it on the day as a shooter, like as a DP, and then you give the footage to it.
They're like, all right, that's a wrap. I'm like, I'm leaving.
Like that's literally a wrap for you. Like now you're done, which is so underrated. You'll never experience that as a freelancer.
Well, the thing is, just DPs work on so many different projects.
Yeah.
I know a lot of DPs personally. I've had this experience as well. It's like I'll wrap on a project and then I got to hop on a flight to go to another one the next day. And a lot of DPs do that. They just bounce around everywhere and hop on projects, so they don't have time to edit, obviously. And there's editors specific for that. But it's it's literally my favorite thing in the world is just not having to edit anything.
I'm jealous. I'm very much so still editing a lot. So day rates are obviously something that varies based on your experience, how much you've been in the industry, and all those things. I really appreciate you telling me that information, and just for the listeners, because no one really talks about pricing. And it's honestly any industry. Like the business stuff and pricing and overall deals that happen, it's almost like you need to know someone that does this so you can ask them questions. It's not something people just talk about openly on the mic. It's weird. It's like people are still feeling taboo about like rates and money.
And the easiest thing to do with a lot of productions, like if you're beginning your freelance like life as a DP, is asking the production what they have budgeted for a DP. And they'll usually say, oh, we have, $1,000 budgeted for a DP. And if that's not what your day rate is, say it's 15, then you just come back and be like, hey, my normal day rate is 15. Can you match that? And most of the time they can.
Yeah.
And most of the time when they give you that number, they have 15 or more budgeted, but they start you at 1,000. It's your job to kind of like push back a tiny bit.
And that's what's cool. I've noticed too, because I've DP'd for a few projects and I've been on crews. That's what I like about the production industry a bit, is that there's less of a dance. Like you're talking to your producer, it's just like you ask them like, hey, what budget do you have set aside for DP? They're like, cool, this is the budget we have set aside. Then you kind of start from there as a starting point. On the freelance video side of things, and you're dealing with clients who are not in the productions, like you're dealing with the actual business owner or like local business or something, right? Or they're looking for social ad. It's always a dance, because they're like, oh, how much do you charge? And you're like, I mean,
well, that's
it's
a
like,
loaded question.
Exactly. It's like, what do you need? Like, do you want a Super Bowl commercial, or are you trying to get like an iPhone video, right? And they're like, I don't know. What do you think we need? And then it's just so much back and forth at times. And I think in the past I used to charge with packages, like, okay, here's package 1, 2, and 3. But I've now learned, as I've grown as a freelancer, that it's not always as clean cut. You can't just be offering like one. Like you could work for a full day, but what you do in that full day can vary widely. Like there's a chill full day job where you just show up with like a camera and a gimbal, and there's a day job where you need to be responsible for like everything.
Right.
And of course you should be getting more compensation for that. So yeah, I'm not a fan of the packages necessarily. It sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. But it's nice to know that for you said something on your rate earlier, which is you don't try to come in and like take the whole budget of the project.
No,
right?
never.
Like
never.
And I think that's good practice. Just with anything you do, with any role, it doesn't have to just be DP. It's any role on crew, any role on set. It's just understanding that you are playing a part on a team and that everyone needs to make money. You can't just come in and be like taking most of the money, which is a little bit of a hard balance as well if you're coming from the freelance world. Because from me and Paul talk about this often too, off the mic, it's really hard to leave the freelance world because you can make a lot more money in certain aspects because you have more control. Like you're dealing with the business owner who has, let's say, a $20,000 budget.
Right.
You can decide how you're going to allocate that money. You could either be scrappy and take home 15,
right,
or you could build out a crew and take home 5, right? Whereas on the production side, it's pretty clean cut. It's like, this is my rate, it's what I get paid.
Well, that's where the investments come in. Like camera, if you want to do lights and all that stuff, like I would have recommended at a certain level. But cameras specifically, you can make a great amount of money on just that rental.
How long do you think you need to stay in the building phases of maybe taking on the jobs you don't really want to?
Oh man, I still do it now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my answer. It never ends. I were
just talking about this.
I heard something from a DP that I look up to that opened my mind up to something. He was saying, dude, I work on so many like crappy projects, and I look at him, I'm like, your crappy projects are like projects that I aspire to. And he said, well, that makes sense, because as you grow, what you perceive as a crappy project just changes because of the growth that you're having. So like year one crappy project might be like interviews or something like kind of BS, but year 10 you're working on major stuff, and then one day you're working on like progressive commercial or something that to some people could be like, oh, I can't wait to work on a progressive commercial. But if you're doing Toyota stuff, you're shooting like major commercials and you shoot progressive, that could be like this is like a crappy job. So it's all about perspective, about where you are in your life and what is a crappy job to you, essentially based on where you are. Does that make sense?
That's fire.
Yeah. I heard that. I was like, oh, that makes total sense. Because my evolution of what I perceived as a crappy job to me has evolved tremendously.
I love that. Because you're so right. Like when I look back on my own journey, maybe people listening are reflecting, it's the same kind of concept as, you are where you wish you were a couple years ago. Right. But for some reason, you're still feeling, why am I not where I am? And it's just natural, right? Like humans evolve, like humans want to grow. And so I think it's natural to always be striving for more. But then, like you said, it's all perspective. It's also having that contentment, also having that gratitude. Right. Because if you're always like in that deficit mindset, then you don't have that abundant mindset, you're always going to be acting like out of desperation. So that's cool. Yeah, I didn't think of like the crappy project thing.
Right.
Yeah,
it's
you're
not
right.
something
Like,
you really think about, but
what-
it makes sense.
it 100% makes
Yeah.
sense. Sweet, man. Well, we can start kind of closing out the podcast. My last question for you would be, it's a question that you asked me on your podcast.
Hey, oh, he's about to throw it back in my face.
I would love to ask you as well. Fun fact, I was on Carlo. He has a podcast as well called The Creative Gap.
Mhm.
And we just did an episode like on this same trip. So definitely we'll link it down, his podcast down in the description, and go check that out because I was on it. You want to hear your boy. But he asked me a question, and it was, if you could go back and talk to your younger self and you were sitting across the table from your younger self, what, like 10 years?
Yeah, I usually base it off of like an initial starting point in the conversation. Like whenever I ask somebody like, give your background or something, they're like, oh, I started like 10 years ago in this. And then I remember that and then go back to that point.
Okay.
So it varies depending on.
So imagine like freelancer version of Carlo and, never even thought of becoming a DP, right? And just is trying to make this content thing work. What advice would you give him if you're sitting across the table from him, knowing what you know now?
Be okay with taking some more risks. And even though being a freelancer, being a content creator, DP is already a huge risk, I think it's about the inner risk of when you're on the project, and it's so easy to just do the simple thing. It's so easy to do the basic thing. It's so easy to just go with what the client wants or what the director wants and never really find your voice. And it's something that I've learned recently, and it's helped me grow, I think, as a person. I had like a revelation moment where I was looking at my work. I was looking at a ton of other people's work, and I'm like, what makes Carlo's work stand out from other people? Why would people want to hire me to DP their project over other people? And it came back, I kept thinking back to like a couple years ago when I was first starting, and I wasn't super confident in myself. So I would just be kind of like a yes man, like, oh, you want that? Okay, I'll just do that. That's fine. But now I want to really treat myself more as like an artist with an artistic expression and a creative vision that I can better help the project rather than just be another tool that's a part of the project. So I guess my advice would be take a little bit more risk in what you're working on and try things, and don't be afraid to fail.
Mic drop. I love that. Dude, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
As I mentioned earlier, Carlo is a super genuine dude. You guys definitely have to go check his stuff out. He's on YouTube. He has a lot of work that's featured around from other people that are posting. And also his podcast, Creative Gap. Go check that out.
Creative Gap. Thank you guys.
Yeah, but thanks for coming on the show. And hopefully we can connect with Paul next time and have another
Paul,
2.0
I'm looking
chat.
forward to meeting you.
Thanks, y'all.